Hello, U.S. History. Welcome to another Varela's videos. So we are now in our unit on the Cold War, and we spent a couple notes talking about how the Cold War has begun. So now let's look at some of the more important Cold War conflicts that happened in the early part of the Cold War. So we're going to first have to kind of remember where we are at by the time we get to 1949. The Soviets have in fact developed their own atomic bomb by 1949, and they have actually tested it. So this becomes what we're going to talk about as the arms race, which is the Soviet Union and the United States both kind of racing to have the most weapons, have the scariest weapons. So if the Soviets develop the atomic bomb, we of course have to develop the H bomb, the hydrogen bomb, which by 1952 we do have this. And as you can see here on this slide, the H bomb is 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb. So this is scary business. So when we talked about this idea of mutually assured destruction, this idea that the we're going to keep talking about how we're going to make our weapons stockpile so large it's going to actually scare each other into not using them. And this is one of those steps. Every time one side develops something, the other side develops something even scarier. Plus, we are continuing to see a massive military expansion. So we're looking at each side, both the Soviet Union and the United States, continuing to expand the personnel that we have in all of our armed forces. So this is where we're at. Let's jump across the world and talk about Asia, specifically China. So in China, they are going to be going through what becomes known as a civil war. And the two sides are the Chinese nationalists, which are led by Chiang Kai-shek. Here's his Chinese spelling right here, so be familiar with both. And this is the leader that the United States supports because we feel that he is a more democratic leader. He, in fact, has been our ally throughout World War II. He was the leader of China while they were our ally in that fight. His opponent on the other side is Mao Zedong, the Chinese communist leader. And he, of course, is backed by the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union will also back the the army of Mao with both military and economic support, just like the US is backing Chiang Kai-shek. So this civil war is dividing China. The reality is, here's a two picture of the two men. This is Chiang Kai-shek, this is Mao Zedong. If you were to ask the Chinese people who they favored, it actually is the communists. The masses, a majority of the people were supporting Mao Zedong. And that's because he's trying to create a China that will be basically led by a peasant army. And that's very appealing to a majority of the Chinese peasant population. Here's the reality though. Do you think peasants are really going to lead China? No. But nonetheless, he has the support of the masses. So by the end of 1949, Chiang Kai-shek leaves China mainland and flees to the island of Taiwan. Mao goes on to declare the People's Republic of China, which is the official name of China, in 1949. Now, because Chiang Kai-shek is in this island of Taiwan, we recognize his government that he is creating in Taiwan as an official government. And that has caused problems even to this day with the People's Republic of China because they claim territorial ownership over the island of Taiwan, and Taiwan views itself to be independent. So, more on that later. Plus, we decide that we are going to help restore and aid Japan in its rebuilding process. So, our former enemy is now going to become our ally because we're hoping that if we help Japan rebuild from World War II, that would help stop or perhaps halt any possible Soviet expansion into Asia. So since China becomes communist, that's a huge defeat in our minds for this idea of containment, the idea of the Truman doctrine of trying to kind of halt the spread of communism. And so we're going to become allies with Japan from this point forward to try and allow and stop for that to happen. Okay, so Moving on, here's a map of China. So you can see Beijing is up here. Taiwan is this island off the coast down here. Russia, Soviet Union is up here. So they are very close to one another. And China is massive. Let's move over to Korea and talk about what's happening with Korea. Because as you can see here, here's China. This is one Korea. And it was one Korea until 1945. Okay. Korea had been a Japanese colony dating as far back as 1910. Now, as World War II came to an end, so 1945, Korea was technically divided only because it was an easy way to get Japanese soldiers to sort of capture them as the war was ending. So the Soviet Union offered to take control of Japanese soldiers in the north, and the United States took control of Japanese soldiers in the south. This division happened at what's called the 38th parallel. So this is a line on a map. That's it. It's that simple. The UN, which has now been established by 1945, is asking for there to be free elections in this country of Korea to unite it because it's no longer a Japanese colony. But guess what? Neither side held elections. There were no elections at all. And in fact, communism just simply infiltrates North Korea from China right here. And the southern part of Korea is going to hold on to some elements of democracy and try to become a republic. So it's going to need some help. And this is where we're looking at the sort of beginnings of the Korean War. 1949, the United States and the Soviet Union both leave. So we leave this Korea in a very sort of chaotic situation. It's technically one country, but yet the northern half, that north of the 38th parallel side, is communist, and the southern half does not want to be. In 1950, North Korea is going to cross over that 38th parallel and attempt to invade the southern portion of Korea. Now, remember, they are not separate countries yet. It was just a territorial divided line to basically capture Japanese soldiers. So, in North Korea's mind, this is their way of uniting Korea under their communist leadership. Of course, South Korea freaks out. The UN is called, and they are going to ask for a military involvement, a protection of South Korea. And some people ask, well, can the UN stop this? Do they have a veto power? They do, but North Korea isn't listening, and North Korea doesn't care. So President Truman is going to send forces to South Korea to aid the United Nations peacekeepers. And because President Truman does not ask Congress to formally declare war on on Korea, this is not really a war. It's technically a police action. Truman never asks Congress to declare war on Korea. We're going to remember this because the same thing's going to happen with the Vietnam War in the next decade. So, and when you think about presidential powers, legislative powers, remember, President Truman is the leader of the executive branch. President Truman is the commander in chief. So he does have the power to authorize our military. Now, normally, as we saw with FDR, the president will ask Congress to declare war. In this case, President Truman did not. And so Congress supports this idea of sending support to South Korea, but there is a little uneasiness about not asking them for a formal declaration. But that's where we're at in 1950. Okay, so American troops who are already in Japan simply move over to South Korea to help the UN forces. The South Korean army is going to also be a part of this fight. So they are fighting alongside Americans and UN peacekeepers. And they are going to basically gather in the city of Pusan. They hold their ground there until more forces can come. So I'm trying to see, the map in our textbook is a little bit better when it comes to kind of showing this one's really small. But basically, they're trying to hold this 38th parallel because North Korea has already infiltrated it. Okay, so yeah, we're right about here. And they're trying to push them back up. General Douglas MacArthur, who we talked about in World War II, is also a part of this fight. In September of 1950, he's going to launch a surprise attack on the port city of Incheon, which is right up at that 38th parallel. And it shocks the North Koreans so much so that within a month, by October of 1950, they're going to be pushed back over that 38th parallel. We're going to be doing some textbook assignments on and some maps on the Korean War. So this will hopefully make more sense once you do those notes. But this is definitely one of those things you want to visualize. But I feel like the Korean War is all about that 38th parallel. It's kind of back and forth over it. So I'm going to go ahead and show you another map. Here's the 38th parallel. So here's that city of Incheon that MacArthur attacked and actually is going to keep pushing the North Koreans north. So MacArthur has the same idea North Korea had. He wants to keep going and unite all of Korea, but in this case, under South Korean control and as a democracy or republic. And he will get all the way up to almost the Chinese border. He will get up to a place called the Yalu River, which is right up here. Now, this freaks out China. So, as you can see, an American army that is hoping to basically turn North Korea into a democratic country is going to freak out the newly communist China. This basically springs China into action. And then within the month of November 1950, you're going to see the Chinese army join this fight. And they are going to push the American army right back down to the 38th parallel. And so this is why the Korean War is back and forth, back and forth. But China wants the exact opposite of what MacArthur is, which everyone wants to see North Korea. The North Koreans want to see North Korea stay communist and perhaps take over the South and make it communist. South Korea wants to take over the North and unite and perhaps make it all a democratic country. China clearly is on the side of North Korea. So this is really a back and forth type of war, and very quick. This all happens within months of the initial crossing of the 38th parallel. So here we have the 38th parallel up here, and with China coming in and North Korea in orange, we're pushing back down. Seoul is the capital of South Korea. So as you can see, with China's help, the line is getting pushed, and South Korea has kind of lost territory again. So we are really at a standstill, back and forth, back and forth. MacArthur is now going to ask to pull out our ultimate weapon, the atomic bomb. Now, again, this is before we have the H bomb. We don't have it yet. And unfortunately, Truman said, no way, we are not dropping a third atomic bomb in Asia. Not going to happen. And instead, he wants to limit the war. He wants to try and keep the war focused just on this peninsula of Korea. Now, MacArthur is going to publicly question Truman's decision. And when that happens, Truman fires Douglas MacArthur. That's a big deal. And in our current political climate, with President Trump, he was very quick to react to criticism. And I think in this case, so was President Truman. But we've talked about the atomic bomb. I don't think dropping an atomic bomb on Korea is the answer here either. I'm going to side with Truman. So what's going to happen with Korea? Well, let's jump to 1953, because honestly, for the next 2 years, it just kind of holds right here, and that's it. It's a little bit of back and forth, and that's it. So by 1953, we have a new president. Dwight D. Eisenhower has become president. And yes, the hero from World War II and D-Day. And he is going to arrange for a discussion of peace terms at the city of Panmunjom, so kind of near the 38th parallel. And the hope is that between a new president coming in, Joseph Stalin dying in 1953, and Eisenhower renewing MacArthur's threat of using the atomic bomb, because we basically have had 2 years of nothing changing, is going to convince both sides, especially the communists, to agree to a ceasefire. Now, Please understand, technically this means that the war isn't over. They're just going to stop the battles and withdraw armies. And that is why North Korea, even to this day, is still divided at the 38th parallel. So if you were to go to South Korea, the DMZ, the demilitarized zone, is at the 38th parallel. It is right here. And they are in negotiations. In fact, a year ago, they did sign a potential treaty to officially end this Korean War. But back in 1953, they decided to keep Korea divided and actually form two separate countries. And that's why we have North Korea today and South Korea. North Korea is still communist, South Korea is not. So I want you to think about a couple things. Don't write this down, just think about it. And if we were in class, we would discuss it. What do you think are some effects of the Korean War? And this could possibly pop up as a short answer question on our test. So let's kind of look at three, I think, game changers from the Korean War specifically. Number one, it does expand the power of the presidency. We see that with President Truman and the police action. We also see that with President Eisenhower and his command of the threat of the atomic bomb. We also, and now H bomb, because by 53 we have the H bomb. Plus, we see the firing publicly of Douglas MacArthur, a very popular American general. Second, we do see the expanded military. That will continue. The Cold War is going to be the time where we see the largest increase in our military personnel and military weaponry. And then a third interesting development is what's called SEATO. This will be on your test. Just like we have NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, SEATO, the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization. And this is going to become a defensive alliance against the spread of communism. So the idea that our Southeast Asian allies, the Philippines, South Korea, other parts of Southeast Asia are going to want to join this organization to kind of be in line with our policy of containment, which is exactly what America wants. Because when China becomes communism, it is sort of a burn to the idea of containment and a fear of the domino theory actually happening. When one country becomes communist, the next country in Asia will fall. And so this was the first step in once China becomes communist, this is our reaction to trying to prevent other nations from becoming communist also in Asia. And now with North Korea, that's like two burns right there. So remember these three effects, they might pop up later. All right, hope you took some good notes, U.S. history, and I will see you in class.